See, my belief is what's most important in education, what's better than, say, a cup of coffee to get the day started, is creativity. The best thing to do every morning, the first thing is start with something creative. It could be something like sound painting, it could be something like whatever the medium is or the discipline is, but it should be accessible to all, and there should be no way to measure one against another. Over the years, I've learned so much about what this language does, how it reveals the artist and the individual, whether that be a child or whether that be an adult. There's an artist in everybody, so to speak.
Yeah.
In other words, everybody's equally creative. I don't believe in genius. Geniuses, throw that out the window. Everybody's equally creative.
Hello, welcome to Masters of the Musiverse, Season 2, Episode 4, I believe. I don't really know, but I think it's Episode 4. This is a conversation with Walter Thompson. It's great. It's wonderful. He is a super intelligent guy, created this thing called sound painting that we're going to talk about in just a little bit. Before that, please subscribe to the YouTube channel, subscribe to the podcast, like the videos, comment, do all the things because they just help perpetuate this. They help with the algorithms that figure out all this stuff, and hopefully someday we'll even monetize this channel. And the other thing, pretty excited about, actually I'm over the moon about, is that the Masters of the Musiverse company is actually a nonprofit as of this week. Woohoo! I've been waiting for that information for quite a while. And what this means is it's just going to open doors, grants and different things like that I'll have access to. It also means that if you're someone that wants to support this endeavor, you can go to my Patreon page and find a giving level that you're comfortable with, and it's tax deductible for you. They call that a win-win. So link for Patreons down below. Please take a moment, check it out. All right. So this conversation with Walter Thompson about sound painting, I think, is best started if we cut to a video with a demonstration of what sound painting can be. This is the act of sound painting is where the conductor, someone that we usually see as a conductor of an ensemble, is actually composing on the spot using the ensemble with gestures. It's really incredible. Let's check out this video. So I think at first sound painting might appear to be something that's for like maybe super intellectual musicians or something like that, or professionals or collegiate people. But here's the thing. As I talk about in this interview, I've done this with my beginning band. I've done it with my jazz band, and it works really well with students. In fact, it works probably better than with adults because the younger kids they don't bring baggage to the game, so to speak. Really, really great interview explaining what sound painting is with some demonstrations like the one you just saw. Let's check it out. Let's dive deep into this and learn about this with my friend. I'm going to call him my friend now, Walter Thompson. Well, Walter, again, thank you so much for joining us here on Masters of the Musiverse.
You're welcome, Scott.
So back in March, I was interviewing your friend, Jeffrey Agrell, about his book, Improvisation Games for Classical Musicians, and he introduced me to the idea of sound painting. I did some research, I practiced some gestures, and I tried it with my ensemble shortly after. I got to say, we had a lot of fun. Before I talk too much about that, let's talk about sound painting in general. So how do you define sound painting?
Well, it's a good question because you have to be, for me, I think it's just a very simple, you just simply say the simple definition is sound painting is a multidisciplinary live composing sign language, period. And now you can elaborate on it more. You say it works with musicians, dancers, actors, visual artists, etc., or people from all walks of life. You don't have to be a musician or a dancer or an actor, or somebody in the performance arts or the visual arts to be able to understand the language, like the American Sign Language. For the deaf, it's or for the hard of hearing, it's a sign language, but it's a sign language for composition in real time.
At first blush, I think that sound painting can seem like an idea that's fit for, collegiate people or professional musicians. But I'll say after trying this with my students, it works well with high school bands. I've done it with my jazz band and probably had the most energy and excitement coming from my beginning bands. In fact, I think that the younger students tend to have less apprehension, right? They're willing to
Absolutely.
go, yeah, I'll do. So what experiences have you had with bringing this to younger musicians?
I think that's a great question, though. I mean, because something you were getting at is that, sometimes younger musicians, say in a music class, they're 10 years old, for example, they often are less inhibited. So my experience is with the younger, say, class of 10-year-olds, is that I can take the language as far as I can, as I do with a more advanced age and a more and like professionals. So as you can teach a concept in English, like the English word, what an English word means, you can explain to somebody what laconic means. Although a child might not know the word laconic, you can explain what it means simply, and then they know the word. It's actually a complex word for a lot of people. It's not part of their normal vocabulary. So in the same way, I can teach complex third level signs to 10-year-olds. So I think what it does for anybody is it opens up, it gets rid of the inhibitions, because sound painting is making art with the individual. I'm not asking you to play a composition I wrote. In this way, I want you to play that F sharp in a very specific way. Follow my dynamics, follow my phrasing, follow my markings, everything. Not here. In sound painting, you offer the sign. It's kind of like an empty box. And the musician, whoever, student, puts their interpretation in it and follows the rules of the sign, so to speak. So anybody can be a part of a sound painting group, no matter what age. So for me, it's working with younger people, I can see that it really, and I use this all the time, so it fosters their creativity. Teachers often say, wow, I've never seen my student so open in a certain way. So it's really a way of helping the individual find out more about their creativity and to develop it.
I would imagine that you find that students want to go more into maybe composition after this experience because of they're like, oh, I can actually create things. Because I think that's something that, like, if we talk to our students about composing something, they always they feel like they don't have the ideas. They're not Beethoven. But in doing something like this, you can clearly point to them as like, you have the germ for an idea. Is that true?
That's absolutely true. In fact, I think I've seen often when I'm teaching the sound painting class, say to kids, 10 years old, I ask them to come up and take the experience of what I do. I teach them a few signs, like how to really sign them physically. Maybe they're doing extremely well as a performer and playing the signs, but when it gets up in front of a group, it's another whole thing altogether. It empowers them in a way, but also it helps them open up about their ability to compose something, or maybe not even thinking of themselves as a composer until they get up in front of a group and go, oh, wow, oh yeah. And I might just teach them whole group long tone pianissimo play, and then leave it up to them, like what they might do with the volume fader. All of a sudden, they might make it louder or softer, louder, and all of it. They're composing when they start modifying. Now they're composing. They're not just saying whole group, long tone, pianissimo, play, and then just leave it at there. They automatically will start modifying and playing with it. So my experience is that it helps people learn about composition for one. Others, like sound painters like Angélique Cormier or Jennifer Rayfeld or Vincent Lecoing or Benjamin Nid, they didn't want to follow they're professionals. They did not want to follow the path of traditional composition. But when they found sound painting, this revealed the composer in them. This was the tool that they needed. Maybe 100 years ago, I would have been hung by my toes for what I'm doing. Maybe more like 150 years ago. Because Charles Ives was around 100 years ago, so he might have saved me. But 150 years ago, I would have been hung by my toes. Like, what are you doing? This is not possible. So
it came out when I was going through your website, the idea that this can be used for students with special needs.
I found, first of all, I had to modify the language a little bit. I took the syntax away and just used what I call launch mode. So when I make the sign, they make the sound. So I would go, oh, for example, or shh. So right when I make the sign, the group makes the sound instead of following the entire syntax, which some people might be able to do and others not. So not to have any kind of frustration. So with approaching the class that way, you're able to teach about 25, 30 signs just with what's called being in launch mode. And then after that, I would have the class also do the signs and then come up and be the sound painter. Mm-hmm. And I have had really, I got like a grant from the Mid-Atlantic Arts Foundation that they funded me for about 4 years back in the late 90s to go in, besides to develop sound painting, to go in and work with people with disabilities, learning disabilities.
So now that we've learned a little bit about sound painting, I'd like to cut to a video of it being used in a few different settings so that people can really grasp onto this. So I'm going to share my screen with you here, Walter, and What I like about those different videos is the very first one shows the student using the sound fader, and it shows you, oh, kids can do this, and they'll probably pick up quicker than us adults. And then that elementary group, I don't know.
So Che Che is also certified, and I think that was him. I couldn't tell.
I think you're right. Yep.
Yeah, I think that was him. And he's a wonderful sound painter. And he just was taking certification recently just because he wanted to test himself.
And if you want, like any educators listening, you want something that's going to engage your students. Have you ever seen so many students be locked into their teacher and just ready to like do the next thing? I mean, it's a super engaging way to teach.
It is, and over the years, I learned. I don't sit down in the chair and say, "Oh, this is what it does." I'm there learning what it does by the doing. Over the years, I've learned so much about what this language does, how it reveals the artist and the individual, whether that be a child or whether that be an adult. There's an artist in everybody, so to speak.
Yeah.
In other words, everybody's equally creative. I don't believe in genius. Geniuses, throw that out the window. Everybody's equally creative. You know what I mean? I won't get into that, but it's just my mission that no one's better than anybody else in creativity. And that doesn't exist at all. It's all a matter of work. As Charlie Parker said, if practicing 16 hours a day makes me a genius, then I guess I'm a genius.
All right. But let's go through a few basics so people can kind of follow like how easy this is to get into, get your foot in the door, so to speak. So let's talk about what is the sound painting syntax.
The syntax is who, what, how, when. So who is going to play? Like it could be assigned for a whole group, or assigned for woodwinds, or assigned for strings, assigned for singers, assigned for percussion, assigned for electronics, etc. So that's the who signs, who, and then what is the content sign, what to play. And there's hundreds and hundreds of those, of course. And then how, pianissimo, slowly, quickly, etc. And there's a lot of ways of saying how. And then when, and when can be immediately or some kind of, entrance within, say, 1 to 30 seconds, depending on the sign you use. Or it can be organically, that you do it by listening only, and you only enter when you have something to offer. So there's everything from entering immediately at the end of the sound painter's hands, or coming in when you feel it's the right place to come in.
Yeah, that's the syntax. And the next thing is the 4 spatial regions.
Right. I learned when I was first sound painting, 100 years ago now, that actually like 47 or something like that. I learned that I couldn't prepare signs. Like if I was standing in what I call neutral, and I was given a volume fader, the my orchestra would respond right away, and I had no way to prepare. So I created the 4 spatial regions. One is neutral. You're just standing there, feet together, straight up, you stand there. Then the box for initiating the phrase. So in neutral, you make all the phrase except for the go sign or the play sign, who, what, how, when. You don't make the when sign. So you have neutral, you have the box, an imaginary, 6 by 3 rectangle, 6 foot by 3 foot rectangle, so to speak, that you lunge 1 foot forward in to give the play gesture, whichever when gesture you want to use. So that's neutral and the box. And then you have, for indicating things that are high in range, middle in range, or low in range, you have an imaginary music staff in front of you, or the imaginary staff. When you're working with movement around this in the space, working with dancers and actors, you need the imaginary stage. So you have stage right, stage left, upstage, middle stage, downstage. So those are the 4 imaginary spatial regions, and that the sound painter utilizes when completing the phrase.
So do you think there's anything else that educators should know about sound painting before they attempt this with any ensemble? I mean,
I think one of the things most important is there's no such thing as a mistake.
Yeah.
This is very key. First of all, educators should know that that anybody can do this. So your class can be, people that are just beginning on their instrument to people that are more advanced on their instrument. Since there's no mistake, the group learns how to, like, say I say whole group long tone pianissimo play, and let's say, Scott, you're in my group and you come and doing pointillism by accident. Well, you can't stop. You have to keep going with the pointillism. So and people have to practice that because we're so used to being taught mistakes exist, but not in this, because you have to keep going with your ideas so that the sound painter can do something with that. Now, once the teacher, whoever is teaching the sound painting, can get the group to understand there's no such thing as a mistake. Very key in developing creativity is to not have mistake as a part of, oh, that's wrong. Once you do that, you close the door on certain people. Some students can take that. They can take, oh, that's wrong. And some can't, and they won't ever come back to your class, so to speak, or they want to quit music, So now I did do this in the beginning for education. This was just something I needed for live composing, because in live composing with a professional group, if somebody stops you, it leaves a hole in the composition. Like we say, in sound painting, wrong and strong, or when in doubt, don't lay out. You keep right on going. If you're not sure what to do, what do I do? What do I do? You play. You don't stop unless you see slowly exit or off, or finish your idea. You don't stop. So this creates it's a very safe environment for students or anybody to show their creativity, because they're never wrong.
I think that's one of the reasons why I likened it to improvisation too, is that
right.
is a big obstacle for students, is they're so afraid of being wrong on something. And so I love that idea of like, there's no mistakes, you interpret it.
So if you think about teaching improvisation with sound painting, most people think, oh, I have to learn jazz, or I have to learn Indian music, or I have to learn, like rock from the 60s or something where there was so much improvisation, with Jimi Hendrix and people like this. No, we're all improvisers. We improvise every day we wake up. Every day we redo our life, no matter what age we are. So it's tapping into that concept as a student, as a player. I put myself into this box. Okay, I do more of this one. Okay, now this one it's scanning, I even get more open choice, So it has all this different level of choice that you give to create the sign. And that sort of that act of filling that empty box, the sign, is a great way to teach improvisation, because you're offering different levels of a response depending on the sign. And now when you speak, when children, let's say, learn sound painting, they have no problem improvising at all. It's not jazz, but it's improvisation with their instrument.
Yeah.
We don't have to put a genre on improvisation to call it improvisation.
Yeah. And that I think too, the idea that sound painting gives a little bit more parameters to improvisation, because I think that's a big obstacle. When you say you can do anything, it's overload. But if it's like, I'm going to give you these parameters now to improvise in, I think sound painting's good for that.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. You could say, woodwind 1, improvise with long tones, slowly enter. Now the woodwind is just improvising with long tones. And maybe they were a little bit, hesitant to do anything before that, and you understand that as a teacher, so you give them a content to improvise with. So now we're getting into another level of development. It's not just woodwind 1 long tone play, it's a static long tone, but then you say woodwind 1 long tone play, and now improvise with the long tone. So yes, so it's I think it's a very good tool for teaching improvisation.
Yeah. All right. So my kind of journey with sound painting was, I learned about it back in April. I purchased Sound Painting, A Language of Creativity for Music Educators by you and Mark Harris.
That's right.
So that I could learn more. Honestly, to prep for this interview, but then also to prep for my ensembles. So I'd like to talk about the resources that you have available, so people know where they can find more information. So first of all, you have a website, and we'll link it in the description. What can we find on the website?
Well, you find just the description of Soundpaint and a bit of history about me, since I created it so many years ago. And then workbooks, schedule, that kind of thing. But I think it's important, people like Soundpaint, you understand something about how sound painting works with education, in education. And then, of course, there's the workbooks there to help people learn about the language. And they come with a video, so that helps a lot to really understand what's going on. So the site is very simple.
Yeah.
It's not,
I'd like to really encourage people, if you're curious, that book that I mentioned, again, The Soundpainting, A Language of Creativity for Music Educators, really helped me wrap my brain around it more. And I feel once I, plan out where I wanted to introduce this, I feel pretty prepared to start doing this with my class after that book and that video that you.
Yeah, I was very fortunate to write the book. The other workbooks I've written myself, I'm just getting ready to publish workbook number 4. That's for sound painting with visual artists. And I'm working on a dictionary that's not being translated into 4 different languages. And it's going to be published next year. I wrote another book, but it was just in Spanish. But on the website are the 4 workbooks, 5 workbooks, with the 4th one coming out in the book I did with Mark Harris. I was really fortunate to work with him on this, because besides he's a wonderful teacher, wonderful educator, out at Metro in Denver, Metro College in Denver, where he teaches sound painting, and he's a brilliant alto saxophonist in whatever music he plays, and a wonderful improviser. And I needed someone who had more of a direct line into, like, how do you teach the standards in music education? How can we relate sound painting to what the music educator in the United States needs? So I wanted to ask Mark to help me with this, and he was great. It was just wonderful working with him on this, and he helped me like really structure the book to appeal to music educators.
I'm curious, your early experiences as a young musician, what were they? Like, you can go all the way back to first time on the piano, or?
Yeah, I started on the piano when I was about 4, and my mother played some. My father was he was a little bit like Chekhov, Anton Chekhov. Chekhov was a dentist, I believe, and also playwright, right? My father was a doctor and an abstract expressionist painter. So he had his office in West Palm Beach, Florida, but we lived part of the year in West Palm Beach, and the other part of the year, the long summers, in Woodstock, New York. And when we go up to Woodstock, my father would drop his doctor. No one knew he was a doctor. So for 4 months out of the year, he was just Ron Thompson, the painter. So he lived a very double kind of life, and he was a very serious, fine artist, painter, and also a writer. And he got his work out there in some minor museums and things, and had quite a lot of shows. And so I grew up, and I have my mother, who is still alive. My father passed away 12, 14 years ago. But my mother was always into taking me out to find objects when I was like 3 or 4 years old, and make found object sculptures in the front yard, which the neighbors didn't care for that. But so I've always had parents that fostered creativity and pushed my creativity. So at 4 years old, I would sit at the piano, but I didn't take lessons. My brother Charles took lessons, and my sister Phyllis took lessons. My brother Rick, no, he was more interested in guitar or something. So I started at 4. I always wanted to be a musician. When I was 6 years old, I knew I wanted to be a musician for my life at 6 years old. I had already made that decision. And I continued. I played in lots of rock bands that had improvisation. In fact, I only played in bands that had improvisation. At that time, I was playing drums.
Oh.
So I switched to drums, had studied drums and played in rock bands and worked quite a lot. And then in my teens, I started picking up woodwinds, and all this time playing piano all the time. And so I was woodwinds and drums and piano. And then I started composing, and then I decided I wanted to get into Indian music. So I was accepted, I forgot where I was, at University of Wisconsin, I believe. They had a very good Indian music department at the time. And I also got into Berklee School of Music. So I started studying jazz when I was 15, 16. And this was now on the saxophone and some on the piano and the drums. So I went to Berklee. And all this time I've had, I had piano teacher when I was like 14, 15, and drum teacher also, but no woodwind teacher at that point. I was more self-taught on the woodwinds. And so when I went to Berklee, I studied all of those instruments, and I wanted to compose. So I started with arranging all this sort of thing. When I was at Berklee, I was very frustrated with how simple some of their classes were. So I asked to join the private study department where I could study with older, like fourth-year students, and take private lessons with them and get out of the program. I wasn't interested in a degree. At the time, universities just didn't offer enough. Berklee was a good school, but I didn't think an artist needs a degree to be an artist. This is different today. But then no. So I petitioned to join the private study department. Mr. Burke and my teacher said, yeah, okay, And so I did the petition where I had to get my teachers to sign a letter. And I went in front of Mr. Burke after all my teachers signed the letter, he and a panel, and they said no. And this is the last month of my first year. So I walked out. I just walked out and quit. And so I had my brother Charles come back to Berklee and sign up using my middle name and my last name. And I went back to Berklee for 3 more years as a different person.
Do I need to edit that out, or do they know now?
Because they know that. I've been teaching at Berklee in Valencia in Spain. Okay. They know this about, and I think I'm going to be invited to. They were trying to bring me to Berklee last year. But no, don't edit that out, because it's a compliment to Berklee. They had the information. I just, not in the order that they were giving it to me. And I was too impatient to wait for, arranging classes in my second year. No, I wanted it now. I was already skilled enough to do that. So anyway, after that, I went to Woodstock, where there was a very happening music scene, because Carl Berger, Ingrid Sertzo, Don Cherry, Ornette Coleman, I believe Ornette was a part of it, had started the Creative Music School, which is alive today still. And it was full. I mean, like people would come, say like Carlos Santana would come for 2 weeks and teach about what he was doing. John Cage would come for 2 weeks, or Anthony Braxton, or Carla Bley, just amazing. They'd come for 2 weeks and share their way that they worked with their art with students. Now, I didn't go to the Creative Music School, but I was there to study and continue learning, and to study with Anthony Braxton, the great American composer, Anthony Braxton. Woodstock, it was easy for me when the summer came, the first summer I was there, the Creative Music School let out, and it wasn't going on in the summer, only throughout the school year, summer break. And then all these musicians were left in town. And I formed my first orchestra for it had about 23, 24 musicians. And I had 7 dancers who I instructed to just, relate to the music. And so I organized 3 concerts and rehearsals. I wrote some simple music kind of kicking off points for improvisation, not like head and improvise, more like little fragments you'd improvise off of. And I had a few other people write. And I organized these 3 concerts at the Woodstock Guild of Craftsmen's Hall. The first concert, in my piece, which I was conducting, the first concert, anybody that was going to improvise was supposed to follow and make a relationship to my notation. So make it kind of, melodic, improvisation as opposed to playing on chord changes, So the first person was a trumpeter, and he didn't really follow my rules. And I became frustrated, as I was conducting, and I became frustrated. So instead of continuing with that frustration, I decided to try to support what he was doing. So in the moment, I pointed at a few people, you, and I made this sign, and I said, play, please, and it worked. People understood this as a long sound, and they played it. It wasn't like as codified as it is today, but they played a long sound, and I was like, whoa, okay, And then a few minutes later, I pointed at a few more people. I thought, what could I have that's kind of pointillistic and arrhythmic and abstract? And I went like this and said, play. And they did it. And that was the birth of sound painting. It really honestly came from a moment of frustration.
Thank you so much for that. That was so interesting. I always write notes when I'm writing. And one of the things I wrote was the significance of creativity at a young age. I would be willing to bet, and maybe not, you can correct me, that idea that your mom had you do those sculptures really influenced the idea that creativity would be important and that you could do it, right?
You're spot on, man. You're spot on, Scott. That's exactly what it was. And when I credit my father for a lot of my influence, because how he was so prolific, and how it was abstract expressionism. So he would be listening to all kinds of music. He listened to every type of music while he was painting, and he would finish a painting in an evening. And these were like on, big masonite boards of like 4x8 or 6x6. I mean, they were big paintings. He would do one in the evening because it's abstract expressionism. But it was my mother who would, at 3 and 4 years old, would take me around to get junk. My mother was just one of these people that is just gifted. Not gifted, I don't believe in gifted. What it was is she was uninhibited.
Yeah.
So it didn't matter what she got into. Like at one point she got into doing jewelry in Woodstock. She took a jewelry class with a very famous jeweler that does more like, art jewelry, if you will. My mother was making everybody flip out by what she was doing in just a matter of, and even when she was painting in this painting class she took with a very well-known teacher, they would flip out at her ability to just express herself. So I think I was lucky. Both my parents were very much into creativity, as a way to get through life,
My wife had a similar mother in her life like they would be at the campground, and she would bring a knife and a bar of soap, and she would have them and so now even though my brother-in-law and her are both professionals, my wife's a chiropractor, he works for the state of Minnesota, he's an unbelievable woodworker. And she is a watercolorist. She paints these beautiful watercolors. And I know that she's the same way. She attributes that to like the kind of things that her mom had them do when they were younger. So here's the big message, everybody. Sound painting aside, creativity, push your kids, and push is the wrong word, because foster. Yeah. And it could be anything. It could be stacking junk, right? It could be carving something out of soap that maybe is not even a duck, it's some shape. But what it does for the young brain is just, I think it's incalculable.
It is. I mean, it's all about exploration. And when you see a child, a young child exploring and doing things, I think some parents will get mad, or you're making a mess. Wrong. Don't do that. Don't do that. They're exploring, and creativity and exploration are almost the same thing at that point.
Yeah.
They're out. My daughter Kaylee would wrap the house, run around the house from room to room. The house was square, and she would run around like this. Now I lived in a square house, but you walk in a circle, So she would wrap the whole thing in toilet paper.
Yes, I would.
Yes. Yeah. She's back behind me. Yes. Yes, she would. Or then I would let her, she would go and get all these plastic bags. I'd keep the plastic bags in a box. She would take them all out and spread them anywhere. Or her mom would let, her mom was a painter, and her mom would let her paint with real paint. Or we'd set her up a kind of a drum set and she would do. So yes, absolutely. And so this is so important, like, let your child explore because it's creativity.
Yeah. All right. So this is just a curiosity for me. So forgive me for this. So although I do many different things, in the end, professionally, I define myself as a music educator. I'm curious how you define yourself professionally.
It's a composer.
Yeah.
And a player. I'm a pianist these days. The instruments came down to more piano these days, and an educator. I'd say all three.
Yeah.
And I put them all in the same. It's hard. It's a little bit apples and oranges. You probably know this. Mm-hmm. Are you a trombonist?
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. So I spend a lot of time on the piano in this pandemic time. And I do get out and record. I don't seek a career as a pianist in that sense, but I do get work also as a player, which is most of the time open form improvisation or working in a sound painting group. And as an educator, I do an awful lot of education. So it's something that I'm really, really interested in because when I was in 5th grade, this teacher used to tap me on the top of the head with a pencil and tell the class, "Don't be like Walter. He's stupid." And I would have to be taken to a psychiatrist to prove to the teacher and to the school, the PTA board made my mother and father take me to a psychiatrist to see if I should be put into a school for people with learning disabilities. And the fact is the teacher wasn't very good and I was bored. Mm-hmm. So I have this mission I've had for a long time and I knew that for me, it was because I was my parents had fostered my creativity. I was a very creative kid, and what the teacher was doing was teaching in a very uncreative way. So she couldn't hold my attention. It wasn't me, it was her, mm-hmm. In my opinion. And so because of that, I had a little bit of a chip on my shoulder, from those days, and anybody calling somebody else unable to learn, like we were speaking before about people with learning disabilities. I mean, my mission there was the community of people that have to, they go to a school for learning disabilities because they have a learning disability. They're not taught creativity most of the time. They're taught how to function in life. And that's horrible. Besides, you have to teach creativity and everything else. You have to help them with their creativity. And as you said, you've got experience with this also and how much people come to life. It doesn't matter what their ability to learn is. Everybody is creative, whether you have, you're a brain that functions so-called perfectly or one that doesn't, whatever. Everybody is creative. And so since I was kind of picked on in 5th grade, and by the way, the teacher and the principal were fired for doing that to me. And they learned wrong. And they learned from the psychiatrist that I didn't have any problems. But because of that time, I kept a chip on my shoulder. So I've always been out there to try to go for, we're all equal.
Yeah.
And so let's teach creativity as the coffee for the classroom, to wake everybody up every day with creativity. Then they want to learn more about math, maybe, or they might have a creative approach to math or to science, to the sciences, or to politics, or to whatever. The more creative you are, the better.
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly even how to define sound painting as a teaching tool, a performance. So I'm just going to say it's a marvelous thing that you have created. That.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, and I'm excited to hopefully bring some more people to the table to learn more myself. Walter, I thank you so much for your time today.
Yeah, thank you very much, Scott, for having me on. I enjoyed it very much. Thank you for your wonderful questions.
Yes, thank you.